Okay. So, remember that little joke that I made about some prize-winning tulips? Yeah, well, funny story. It turns out the gypsy curses can actually be transferred to loved ones, like, say, your wife, for instance. I thought that would be impossible, but it turns out it's super easy, barely an inconvenience. Now, it sounds familiar. Where did I hear that before? Was it pitch meeting, I think? Right. Get to the point. Good idea, baby. So, I just want to say that what I did to those begonias and the tulips was wrong. I admit it. It was juvenile, it was thoughtless, it was just plain wrong. What I did to that rosebush was hysterical. Now, I know I promised a chapter on starships and their respective troopers, and that is coming. But something caught my attention that is linked to the previous chapter, and I just would like to discuss it briefly. The name of the first book I discussed was Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, a title that describes one of his rules on writing screenplays, and a rather controversial one at that. It seems that a lot of people look at that rule and feel Blake Snyder was saying, in the beginning of the screenplay, the character must do something virtuous to bring the audience on board. They must save a cat, push a little lady out of the path of a speeding bus, save a child from drowning. They must do something objectively good and, in effect, prove to the audience that the character themselves is good. But, as many critics cry, what if my character isn't so good? What if I want to write about a nefarious character who's up to underhanded deeds? Why should I have to make my otherwise vile denizen of the underworld do something good just to win over the approval of the audience? Well, my answer is, you don't. Nobody said your character has to be good, but it must do something righteous to win us over. The key is to have your character do something that helps the audience identify with them. Something that we can look at and say, I would probably do that. That is the choice I would make. Or at the minimum, that's pretty cool. I want to see where this goes. At that moment, you have hooked your audience, and they are on board to follow your protagonists on their journey. So, to make my point, I'd like to briefly go through the openings of 3 movies where the lead characters are anything but virtuous, who do not literally save a cat or anything close to it. However, what they do accomplish is a feat so daring, so humorous, so bold, that we cannot help but want to identify with them and join these miscreants in the adventure unfolding before them. So here are my 3 examples of no cat saving, save the cat moments. The first is Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The movie opens with a shot of a chain gang, and the entire sequence is beautifully shot. In these brutal few moments, we feel that hot sun beating down. We taste the grit and dust in our mouths, and we feel those heavy chains on our limbs. We have no problem understanding this is a horrible existence for these inmates, performing labor few would choose to do under the best of circumstances, under physically punishing conditions, while constantly under the threat of death. Nobody has to explain to us why any one of these unfortunates will want to run for the hills. Then the action shifts along with the music, and we see 3 inmates chained together making a bumbling attempt at escape. We see them making their awkward way through a nearby field, constantly diving to the ground to avoid detection. We see them ineptly chase a chicken around a barnyard, making off with their prize and dining in the rough, only to have their meal interrupted by the baying of a bloodhound. Lastly, we see our trio chase desperately after a train, the first 2 gaining entry to an open and occupied car, only for the third to comically fall, dragging the first 2 back out, their escape thwarted. These characters are convicts, attempting to make good their escape from their court-appointed punishment. There is nothing virtuous about them or their actions, and yet at this point, we are certainly with them. We want to see them escape and follow them on whatever path they choose, because in just a few minutes, the movie has succeeded in enlisting us in their struggle and got us to like them by being just as bumbling and inept as we feel we would be in their place, yet also making them successful enough in their efforts to make us want to see how far they will get and what it is so important to make them want to attempt this daring getaway in the first place. No cat has been saved, but they certainly have earned our interest, and the goal Blake Snyder outlined with his rule has been achieved. Next, let's look at the movie Snatch. Now, I'll say up front, this movie is not for those who do not care for harsh language. Vulgarity is used and used often throughout the film. but is a highly entertaining comedy/action flick, and I highly recommend it for those who enjoy rooting for characters who are more than a bit rough around the edges and can stomach a fair amount of rough language. So, how does this movie obey Blake Snyder's much maligned rule? As the movie opens, we have a clever introductory scene to our two protagonists, Turkish and Tommy. No choir boys, these two, managing unlicensed boxing matches. We know they are criminals from the start. Now, I say clever because this scene is essentially an info dump, giving us the names and a very brief bio on each character, and leading up to a hint of the current predicament they find themselves in. Handled poorly, this could have been a very boring scene of a text scroll or a simple voiceover. However, as Turkish speaks, we watch the two characters sit in what could possibly be a police interrogation room awaiting some verdict. As they fidget and gaze around themselves with practiced bored expressions, we know the situation is tense. Something very bad happened to get them here. We're intrigued. But what really hooks us is what happens next, and our two ne'er-do-wells aren't anywhere to be seen. We are looking through a security camera as what appears to be a group of Hasidic Jews make their way through a security checkpoint. Not only do we watch their progress, but we hear a running conversation of religious philosophy between the group, which is highly amusing, mainly thanks to the delivery of the central speaker, Frankie Fourfingers, played by Benicio del Toro. When the group reaches their destination, we get our first real hint something is very wrong here. The man they are here to meet does not recognize them. In the blink of an eye, the disguises are off and the raid ensues. It's audacious, fast, and brutal, with dialogue that somehow still manages to border on the darkly humorous. What they're doing is so horrible, and yet we are on board. Why? First off, they're stealing diamonds, and though they are not gentle in their methods, it is clear they are not really here to hurt anyone, just to get the loot and leave. Second, the method of the larceny is so bold and outlandish, with such comical performances by the imposters, we can't help but like them, even as we abhor what they are doing. The defining moment is when Benicio approaches the manager and, in his brutal fashion, pleads with the man to relinquish the stone so they can take the gem and be on their way, no further harm done. And yet, with the safety of employees and likely family members at stake, you can see the struggle within the manager's eyes. It's the embodiment of the old Jack Benny bit, your money or your life. Well, I'm thinking. To me, this is the save the cat moment, as by the time Frankie Fourfingers hands over his gun in the getaway van, preparing for his flight to London with the swag, the movie has us hooked. On some level, we now empathize with the situation of the characters, and we want to find out how this all ties into the plight of Turkish and Tommy. No cat is saved, but the effect is the same. We like these characters, and we are ready to follow them where they lead. Lastly, but certainly not least, is Payback with Mel Gibson. The tagline says it all: get ready to root for the bad guy. In no moment of this movie are we misled about Mel's character. He is a small-time thug who specializes in small-time crimes. This is one of the ongoing gags of the film. When he explains the amount of money he is attempting to reclaim, everyone acts as though it's a ridiculously small sum. To Mel's character, Porter, the amount is not the issue. It's the principle of the thing. He stole it fair and square and he wants it back. The mistake all of the antagonists make is underestimating how much he is willing and more than capable of doing in order to get it back. A great action film, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to write an anti-hero as their protagonist. Now, this opening scene is as gritty and brutal as it gets. With the backdrop of a grimy, poorly maintained medical office, we watch an out-of-shape, unshaven man put on surgical gloves over unwashed hands, over a filthy kitchen sink full of pots and pans. Watch as he pours himself a stout drink of whiskey, drinks it all down in a single go, then pours a second glass to drop his surgical instruments into. That's as close to sterilization as these tools will get. The target of his intentions, a mortally wounded Mel Gibson, Porter, who we are informed is suffering from GSWs, or gunshot wounds, an ailment that would need to be reported to the police if he had gone to an emergency room, telling us immediately that how he got them is something he does not want to inform the authorities about. Once again, we find ourselves the victims of an info dump, but done in such a way that we don't mind taking it all in because we are far too centered in watching these bullets being pulled from Mel one by one. Of course, Mel Gibson's excellent deadpan delivery, dripping with gallows humor, really makes the scene. From this moment, we know who he is, what side of the legal line he stands on, and what his objective is. 70 grand. That's what they took from him, and he tells us he is going to get it back. Considering he's going through the sans anesthetics, we are inclined to believe him. We are hooked. Now, part of me wants to call this the save the cat moment, but there's a much better moment coming up. With that highly unsanitary surgery behind him, Mel Gibson's Porter is back on the streets and in top form. In a series of scenes, we see him pick a man's pocket, parlay his ill-gotten gains into a small fortune and a gun, and fill his belly with some fine eats. All the while, Porter tells us all about what he is doing, leaving us no doubt he feels no remorse for his victim or those he steals from along the way. For the more morally inclined, this does not exactly make Porter endearing. But wait, the save the cat moment is on the way. Flash forward, and Porter is lurking beside an apartment late at night. As he looks out into the streets, a lone woman staggers home, clearly under the influence of at least one recreational drug. Yes, alcohol does count in some states as a drug. As we watch in horror, Porter follows the woman in and forces his way into her apartment, knocking her out in the process. This is terrible. And yet, as he makes certain the apartment is empty, we are informed what his connection is to the inebriated woman. She is his wife, and he is here not to exact revenge, but to free her from the narcotics she is clearly addicted to, whether she likes it or not. Sadly, his efforts are ultimately in vain. But in the following flashback, we see the heist, the relatively small-time payoff it netted, and the betrayal of his partner as he claims it all. We also learn that it was Porter's wife who put those bullets in him in a very deliberate attempt to claim his life. We also see the damning evidence that fueled such rage, learning that Porter may have very well deserved some of the abuse he received. Nonetheless, here he is, not looking to exact punishment on his estranged spouse, but attempting to save the very woman who tried to put him 6 feet under. We like him. He's not virtuous, and he may even have had ulterior motives for wanting his wife clean and focused, but he did try to save her life and even exact some revenge upon those who supplied her the deadly concoction that claimed her. Here is your Save the Cat moment, performed by a character that is no more honorable than any other street thug, and yet he has endeared himself to us. We are indeed rooting for the bad guy. Well done, Mel. So, there is my argument for the Save the Cat rule. It does not have to be a purifying moment for the character. Your protagonist does not have to be a paladin throwing his or her body into the path of an oncoming bullet to save the life of a nun. They just have to do something that helps us identify with them. Something we can feel like we would do if we were in their place, no matter how horrible the surrounding circumstances. If you can do this, you have a much better chance of getting your audience on board with your main character and give your story a big step towards success. At least, that's the way I see it. Now, in my next chapter, as promised, I will... Shit, she found me. Alright, beautiful. I made the apology. I'm pretty sure the gypsy heard it. Everything's gonna be fine, really. Now just calm down. Hey, why don't we go out in the town tonight, huh? We can go to a show, maybe at the drive-in theater. Grab some dinner? Yeah, that sounds good, right? Then we can shoot back here for a few treats and... Hey, maybe a nice relaxing flea bath. What do you say?
No!